And then I'll also comment that like a lot of times best interface is no interface at all. See this in a lot of content-driven websites. In the early days, that might have been Flickr, like a photo sharing website that had very little interface.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Nodes of Design. To help support our mission spread knowledge, we have a very special guest in today's episode. Let's welcome Irene, who is a design partner at Khosla Ventures, working with early, mid and late stage startup CEOs, where she's dedicated to raising the value of design and user research within software companies through better methods, practices, processes, leadership and talent. Irene has an unprecedented experience elevating the strategic importance of design within technology companies, having built and led the entire user experience and design teams at Google, Yahoo and Udacity. She began her career as an interaction designer at Netscape Communications, where she worked on design of the internet's first commercial web browser. For 10 years, Irene taught yoga at Avalon Yoga Center at Palo Alto, where she also is among the teacher training program faculty. She is a frequent author and speaker on mindfulness practices, design and creativity. Irene is also an adjunct lecturer at Stanford University and teaches product design in mechanical engineering department. Irene has also authored the book Design in Venture Capital, and her popular essays can be found on Medium. She has been featured in Wired, Fast Company and Comad magazine and on the cover of Mindful magazine. In this episode, Irene had shared great insights on psychology of design, how human behavior and emotion influence design decisions. We started the episode by defining the intersection of psychology and design and what are the key principles that designers should consider when designing for human behavior and emotions in their work. We then spoke on few design projects that Irene had led where psychology had played a crucial role in shaping the final product. We then spoke on how could designers use color, typography and other visual elements to evoke specific emotional response in users and what are some of their best practices for doing so. Later then, we concluded the episode by cultural and societal factors influencing design decisions and what are the strategies that designers can use to create designs that resonate with the diverse audience. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and on every Friday, we release new episodes with different creative leaders from around the world to help you better understand different concepts related to design. So don't forget to tune in into Notes of Design every Friday. With that being said, happy designing everyone. Hi Irene, welcome to Nodes of Design.
Hello.
So Irene, how was your day so far?
It's early in the morning, so it's pretty good, but very wet. It's very wet outside. I've already taken a walk in the rain with the dogs.
Oh, that's great. So Irene, if you could give a brief about yourself to our listeners out there.
I'm currently an operating partner at Khosla Ventures. Khosla Ventures is a premier venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. As an operating partner, my role is to work with the CEOs and portfolio companies to help them be successful. And my area of expertise is in design and user experience. Increasingly, entrepreneurs are understanding how crucial design is to the success of their business. And so I advise them on all matters related to design and sometimes beyond. I also am an adjunct lecturer at Stanford University, teaching in the product design program. And I have taught yoga for 9 years now.
That's wonderful, Irene. So what was your journey into design and how did you start? And what are your tips to the beginners on starting their journey?
Sure. As a child, I really leaned towards math and science fields, mostly because I was not allowed to participate or pursue creative endeavors. My father thought that it was a waste of time and money. So, my choice of study in college was really driven by my proclivity towards math and science. I liked the definitive nature of these fields where there's a clear right or wrong. I was the only girl in my class who studied computer science, but I fortunately had a personal computer very early on, and that led to a lot of confidence that I had with computing. So I studied electrical and computer engineering in college and learned how to make robots and studied chip design and semiconductors and that sort of thing. I went to graduate school at the top university in the US at the time for electrical engineering with the thinking that I would focus on chip design. And when I was there, I discovered the field of human factors and engineering psychology. And I just couldn't believe that such a field existed because it felt like it was my calling. It was what I wanted to focus my energy on, but didn't know that it was possible to do it in this way. And this was in the mid-90s. NCSA at the University of Illinois developed Mosaic, the first web browser. And that just captivated my imagination. So I switched my field of study from electrical engineering to human-computer interaction and cobbled together my own program of study, drawing from courses in the departments of psychology, computer science, industrial engineering. Because back then, it wasn't possible to kind of study or major in human-computer interaction. It was such a nascent field. And then upon leaving the University of Illinois, my first job was as an interaction designer at Netscape Communications, which was the first commercial web browser that the world had seen. It was a happy moment in my life because I just felt like I couldn't believe that I got paid to do this job. It was the most fun I could possibly imagine. And then from Netscape, I moved on to Yahoo. I was the founding interaction design at Yahoo when they started to evolve from being a web directory to a site that would offer more web applications and services. And eventually, I built Yahoo's human-centered design practice, and eventually I became the VP of design and user experience for all of Yahoo and led that for 8 years until I got recruited by Google to basically do the same job. Although the job titles were very similar and on paper the companies seemed to be direct rivals, the truth is that the journeys and the cultures of those companies were very, very different. And so in a lot of ways, it was like starting over all over again, having to come in with a beginner's mind around how to effectively lead a design organization within a rapidly growing company. And so I ran design for Google for years. And then after Larry Page became CEO, there was a massive reorganization where all the functions were decentralized. And so I helped shepherd that change through. But that's also around the time when I became more immersed in studying and practicing yoga. And that was increasingly where my heart was. So I did a lot of teacher training, spent a lot of time meditating and practicing yoga, and eventually left Google. I considered going into venture capital at that time. But in 2012, I have to say the landscape for women in venture capital was very bleak. And I did not want to be in that kind of environment. And so coincidentally, I was kind of persuaded to join Udacity, first as a consultant, and then I was having so much fun, I joined full time. This was concurrent with my role as an executive in residence or entrepreneur in residence at another venture capital firm called Trinity. So it was really interesting to be on both sides of the table. On one hand, learning how venture capital worked and listening to deep pitches and reviewing deals. And then on the other side, being with this young startup that was in its Series A and trying to raise capital and pitching to VC firms. And it was also exhilarating because when I was at Google, by the time I left, I was running an organization of about 350 people. And at Udacity, when I joined, the company itself only had 20 people. And eventually my team consisted of like 4 people, including myself. But it was exhilarating to be making again. And I learned a lot about what it was like to be in such an early stage startup, which frankly set me up better for helping and advising companies as part of a venture capital firm. And so once Udacity found product market fit and the job really was about building a team and building a product and scaling it, jobs that I had done many times over at Google and Yahoo, I decided to leave. And then 3 weeks later, Vinod called me and said, now are you ready to join? And so I've been at Khosla Ventures ever since. In terms of your other question, what are my tips for beginners starting their design journey? I would say the foundational question would be to ask, what does the world need and how can I help? Because I think it's really important to be aware of the world around you. Where are things going and what are the gaps so that you can figure out how you can contribute meaningfully in the world. That may be through whatever talents and skills and expertise or energy that you have. I think also as a beginner, and this is true to my experience, not only as a designer, but also as a new yoga teacher. The director of the studio where I started teaching, he said, you're in the basement because you're a new teacher. Everyone starts in the basement and then you work your way up from there. So like my time slot that I was assigned was 7 a.m., which was a time slot that most people did not want. And when I first started teaching, I would have 3 or 4 people in the class. But I eventually built it up to a very popular class, and it became one of the most popular times for people to come to class. And I did so by saying yes to as many opportunities that came to me. And sometimes those were unpaid, but it was a chance to learn and grow. So like if there were any opportunities to substitute teach for another person in a different time slot, that would be a chance, for example, for me to get to know others and for people to get exposure to me and slowly people would start to recruit. So say yes, of course, within reason. Always continue to learn and grow and evolve, and kind of take the time to listen to the world and listen to yourself. So like in Hatha Yoga, we have these principles around you start where you are, and then you join movement with breath, which is really in some ways could be a metaphor for being and doing in the world. And then the third principle is like to take time to get feedback from your own body, from your feelings and heart, and from other people. And then you iterate. And if you think about it, those are exactly the same principles that we use in design. Is you start where you are, put something out there, you build something, you test, and you get feedback, and then you iterate. So that those are nice principles to live by in general. Then the other piece of advice I would have is to seek mentors and to find people who model the behavior that you'd like to see in yourself. And it doesn't even have to be a formal mentoring relationship, although that's always nice too, to have somebody as a sounding board, but to kind of have a prototype, like a model to follow. It's sort of like the North Star vision for yourself.
Thank you so much, Irene, for sharing such inspiring journey and those wonderful tips. So let's begin our episode. So how do you define the intersection of psychology and design? And what are the key principles that designers should consider when considering human behavior and emotion in their work?
Design, when it's done well, makes you feel something. Something that's well designed, when something is considered well designed, when the audience of your product or service or whatever it is that's being made feels exactly what the designer intended for that person to feel. So we often talk about how design is about intention, but did you deliver on that intention? And that delivery really, it can only be assessed by who the recipient is, who the audience is. Yeah, there are metrics and things like that, but at the end of the day, people are left with what they feel. And the feeling can span a range of things. It could be happy, joyful, delighted, frustrated, confused, but it could also be like efficient, powerful, calm, humble, wealthy. So that's really at the highest level. This is how psychology and design relate to each other, but also like the services and the products that we surround with ourselves with, it is something that we are, as human beings, that we're interacting with in the world. And anytime you have an interaction, whether it's between two people or between a person and object, there is psychology there. There's perception, there's cognition, there's motivation, there's action and behavior, and all of that is psychology. Design really is all about psychology. I mean, they're synonymous to me. In terms of principles designers should consider when considering human behavior and emotion in their work, there are a few principles, and this is not by any means a comprehensive list, but I think some of the key things to think about that are top of mind. One is to recognize the diversity. Not everyone is the same. Not everyone has the same history or values, education, background, goals. So the more you understand the diversity, the more informed you can be about making decisions that serve your audience. The second principle would be to understand the context of use. What is happening before, during, and after your audience interacts with your work? And what is the audience thinking, doing, and feeling during each phase and stage of the journey? As a designer, it's extremely important for you to understand this so that you can design effectively for those emotions. Since, as I said before, design is all about making you feel something. And hopefully that's making you feel what the maker intended you to feel. The third principle is to design for error prevention and recovery. So it's really important to do ample scenario planning to imagine various inputs and outcomes. Also to know that it's not possible to anticipate everything that could possibly happen. So you have to make sure that there are ways for the audience to recover elegantly, not fatally. So you have to permit easy reversal of actions, offer error prevention, simple error handling. And then the fourth principle, I would refer to this as balancing automation and human control. And things are happening so fast right now with generative AI that this principle, I think, is more important and relevant than ever before. As tasks become increasingly automated, how do you find ways to create transparency, give users a sense of control, and a way to override? And how do you support people's internal locus of control so that they feel like they're still on top of the situation and have some agency over the outcome in their lives?
Thank you so much, Irene. Those were some wonderful principles. So could you please walk us through an example of design project where psychology played a very crucial role in shaping the final product, and what specific strategies or techniques were used?
I'd like to give two examples because I think they're very different. So one example is from a startup in our portfolio called Because Market, and they've already launched, so people can go look at this. Their first incarnation is to launch as a delivery service for adult care products, like adult incontinence products. First, the founders saw that this was an underserved market and one where there are real strong human needs. Like many older adults don't necessarily have the ability to go run to the store and pick up something. Many of them can't drive. It's also kind of a very intimate and personal product, and one that maybe people don't feel comfortable purchasing publicly. So they thought this might be a way to deliver the product discreetly to people who need it the most and are the least able to purchase on their own. So this insight in itself is psychology. Just the fact that they identified these unmet needs and came up with a solution is remarkable in itself. But then they also, when they were designing the service, they more tactically looked at what is it like to be an older human being. And so they simulated constraints that are often imposed on the elderly, such as limited mobility, limited grip strength, impaired hearing, impaired vision. They stuck cotton balls in their ears and simulated what it would be like to be an older person while conversing with the customer service representative. They rubbed Vaseline on their glasses to simulate vision impairment. They, taped up various limbs to simulate arthritic conditions. And the insights from that prototyping changed the direction of the packaging. So, for instance, instead of heavy cardboard boxes that these products would be shipped in, which could be very difficult for an older person to bring upstairs, they decided to ship these products in large paper mailers. They also, these insights also affected the visual design of the website and the customer service representatives and how they spoke and the quality of the audio. So this is an example where psychology played a crucial role in the tactics, not just the strategy, and in how it shaped the final product. So psychology spans a range of things, but like if you think about how it encompasses human perception, cognition, interaction, like again, psychology and design are pretty much equivalent. The second example I'd like to talk about is Udacity. So when Udacity first launched, founder Sebastian Thrun, he was an adjunct professor at Stanford in computer science, and he decided to put his class online. He was inspired by Saul Khan, who founded Khan Academy. And practically overnight, he got hundreds of thousands of people taking his class on computer science online. And he said that he started to feel really depressed as the physical attendance in his class started to dwindle because the online class was so good. And when he put his class out there for public consumption, we did an analysis of the different personas who were on the platform. Who are these people taking this class? And we found that it was really impossible to classify into just a few categories. There were as many as 40 different personas on the platform, ranging from high school students to lifelong learners, people who were just curious to, people who were like, beyond 50 and just wanted to learn something new. But we felt like in order to find product market fit, we needed to get sharper clarity around who we were targeting. And that's not to say that we were deliberately excluding anyone from the platform, but that we wanted to crystallize who we were targeting and designing for. And we identified that the most valuable personas, the ones who are the most motivated, were they kind of fell into three categories that were very similar. Maybe people who wanted a career in tech but did not have a degree in a tech-related field. Second category would be people who were in college and wanted to augment their education in a tech field. And then there were also like high schoolers who were looking to get ahead and may or may not have been able to afford college. So we kind of created a conglomerate persona based on those three personas who were basically, people early in their careers who wanted a career, who wanted to develop a career in tech. And by understanding their motivations, we conversely talked to tech companies who would be potential employers to learn were they hiring people with this kind of profile? And if not, why not? And what we learned was like these tech companies said, we would love to hire college graduates or people with these kind of qualifications who didn't go to college. But frankly, right now, they're just not job ready. Even if they have a college degree, they're just not job ready. And so we saw this opportunity, this gap in the market. And we found a way to bridge that gap through a unique course offering and teaching style, and also partner with key companies in the industry, because Sebastian had a lot of friends across the industry. He was responsible for Google's self-driving car efforts and was the first executive to run Google X. And so because he had these unique assets, we were able to forge relationships with these key companies and then design a curriculum that could be tailor-made toward landing a job in those companies. And so this kind of brings me back again to like one of your earlier questions around like what are the tips for beginners? And this is true for startups too, is to ask, what does the world need and how can you help? So we saw that there was this gap here. There was an opportunity for us to make a meaningful difference, and in a way that was very unique to what we had to offer, very different from Coursera or other learning platforms at the time where they were, partnering with universities and things like that. We took a very different approach. So there is a lot of psychology involved in this as well, like just understanding human behaviors and emotions, motivations, and then tapping into that to, create an offering that would fill those needs.
Thank you so much, Irene. So how could designers use color, typography, and other visual elements to evoke specific emotional responses in users? And what are some of the best practices for doing it effectively?
Well, first, I would encourage people to understand what is the impact that design has on people. Going back to the earlier principle I raised about recognizing the diversity, just know that people from different backgrounds or cultures or contexts will respond to design in different ways. So design is not necessarily universal. So this is one of the confounding things. So understanding like how do people respond to your design emotionally, and then also from a performance perspective, like cognitively. So just as an example, like at Google, we were really designing for efficiency. Like the number one design principle at Google is to offer a fast experience. So fast means a lot of things. Like, when you type a search query into Google, the search results page will say that it's serving up this result in 0.004 milliseconds or whatever, So fast refers to the latency, but fast also refers to the efficiency with which the user can read and comprehend and get to what information they're looking for. And so that really dictated in the user interface design how we approached visual design. So for example, we know from human interface research that black text against a white background is the most efficient for people reading on screens. This is why Google always had black text against a white background. In fact, for a long time, designers were not allowed to use any gray text whatsoever. We also used sans serif fonts, used Arial for a long time instead of sans serif fonts, because again, that's what the human interface research suggested. Things like the leading, the space between lines, that was heavily tested for efficiency of use and evolved over time as people learned how to scroll. Like in the early days of the internet, a lot of people didn't know how to scroll web pages. And so that influenced how we used to design. And then with the proliferation of mobile devices, like scrolling is a very natural thing. And so then that behavior translated onto the desktop experiences. And so now scrolling is no longer the same design consideration that it used to be, but is still something that people have to pay attention to. That's an example of how, going back to the first question, design is about successfully making people feel the way you want them to feel. And so if Google's intention was to make people feel efficient and powerful, every detail in the user interface was designed to kind of optimize for that kind of outcome. In Google search results, we know that the underlying links serve as an anchor for search results. It's easier to scan and the leading and the fonts affect readability. Another example might be and we sort of take this for granted now because every website now is designed like this. But in the early days of the internet, that wasn't necessarily true. But if you think about the general layout of the page, through eye tracking studies, we could see how people's gaze fell on the page. And especially in cultures where people read from left to right, the eye gaze starts in the top left corner, and then the rest of the eye trace is shaped like an F. So you go from left to right, and then top to bottom, and then it sort of dies off the lower down on the page that you get. And so that understanding led to the general UI framework for the web services that we developed at Yahoo, and ultimately affected the design of every web service and application on the planet. But it was really through that understanding of how people read and how people process information. We talk a little bit about emotion. And so I talked a lot about kind of like human perception and cognition, but like designing for emotion, which I think is also closely related to this person's question around using color, typography, and visual elements to evoke specific emotional responses in users. I mean, I think a very salient example in my mind is like the evolution of Yahoo products and services over time. In the early days of the internet, every page on Yahoo pretty much looked the same. It was black text against a white background. It had the same UI framework. But as Yahoo started to compete against vertical players, so like Yahoo Sports was in direct competition with ESPN.com for advertising dollars, or Yahoo Personals was in direct competition with Match.com for users. And the general manager for each product had its own profit and loss statement. So they were optimizing for competing against their verticals as opposed to being part of one company called Yahoo. They started advocating for look and feel that would directly speak to users in those categories. So like Yahoo Sports wanted a more masculine feel. Yahoo Personals needed to appeal more towards women, so they wanted something more feminine. And so the choice of colors, sports having a more aggressive look with bold white text against a red banner background, or white text against a blue, dark blue background, very masculine color tones, a lot of angled corners. And Personals, they want their logo to be all lowercase and in sans serif with a gray font that was very lightweight and more pastel colors and things like that. Each team was very reasonable in their motivation to appeal to specific audiences. And I won't comment on the wisdom of that from a business perspective, from a Yahoo perspective, but from a design perspective, that had severe consequences around the look and feel, because the designers were deliberately using different colors and type and layouts to appeal to these really contrasting audiences. You could see that even in competitor websites. Like, I think now these two companies are starting to converge, but when they first launched, there's this company called Levels, and then there's another company called NutriSense, and both offer continuous glucose monitors so that people can monitor their blood sugar levels. And Levels kind of started out really with a strong biohacking message. Like, they were targeting people who listen to Dave Asprey, biohackers who are trying to optimize their health and life. And so the website was like very dark. It had a black background with white text. And it was all about measurement and optimization. Whereas NutriSense was, it seemed like it was trying to appeal to women who were more motivated by health and wellness concerns. And it's so interesting how, like, at least in the US, if it's men talking about it, it's biohacking. And if it's women talking about it, it's wellness. So this is just the language that we use. It's all about branding. It's really the same thing, but maybe for men to focus on wellness is too much of a warm, fuzzy thing. And that if we refer to it with metrics and data, like biohacking, it suddenly becomes legitimate and more appealing. But the visual design for NutriSense, I think, reflected kind of who they were targeting, because it was a lot of leafy green vegetables, things like that. But again, I think like increasingly we see these two companies converge in their visual design, because they're starting to see like the audience is more or less the same. And then I'll also comment that, like, a lot of times best interface is no interface at all. You see this in a lot of content-driven websites. In the early days, that might have been Flickr, like a photo sharing website that had very little interface, and it was the photography that was the interface. Or like TikTok, it's the content that's the interface. And so sometimes the best interfaces are the ones that just get out of the way. And for Yahoo and Google, that has certainly been the case. The whole point was to create very lightweight interfaces that would load quickly and get out of the way so that users could get to the information they were looking for as fast as possible. And then the question was really asking about visual design, but I'll also point out that it's not just the visual design that can evoke emotional responses, but also the interaction, like how you move through the site. And, that in a way is like, as a designer, it's kind of like making a movie, it's storytelling. And there's also the voice of the interface, just the choice of words, the grammar, the degree of slang, or even the presence or lack of presence of language. Design is not just about what you see, but the whole experience that goes into it. And it's a lot of times not what is added, but more importantly, it's about what is not included.
So, Irene, how do cultural and societal factors influence design decisions? And what strategies can designers use to create design that resonate with diverse audience?
When I think about this question, I am reminded of the classic tension between localization and internationalization. Like on one hand, internationalization is like you build once and you kind of translate and hope that the experience works for everybody in different languages. Localization would be to give local teams more freedom, more autonomy to understand the local market and their needs, and then to design specifically for those languages and cultures. Obviously, the second approach is more expensive than the first, but presumably would be more targeted and more effective. And this is a real challenge. There's no right answer. I think it's very context dependent also based on the company's priorities and resources and the markets that they're trying to serve. Based on my experience, a lot of companies might try the internationalization approach first. And then as they build momentum and traction, then maybe they start to allocate more resources towards developing more locally, especially if the opportunity is there, the market, talent. In the early days of the internet, talent was a big consideration and a limiting factor. But I'll give a concrete example in terms of the development of Yahoo and also Google in Asia. So like in Asian languages, the language is just more dense and more efficient. And a lot of times the layout is different. If you go to the physical environment in a lot of Asian countries, like because the written language is so dense, visually, you just see a lot more. I mean, especially in the large cities, there's signage everywhere and there's a lot of text everywhere. It seems like in a lot of Asian countries, people are used to seeing more language, or at least like to the untrained eye, like that. So there's a cultural difference and a language difference. At the time when both Yahoo and Google were getting started in Asia, there wasn't as much content available in the Asian languages. So browsing made more sense than searching. Like there just wasn't a large corpus of information to index and search. And so those interfaces, those early interfaces in those countries were really optimized for browsing and not searching. So like the home pages for Yahoo and Google actually had more content than, like at least in Google in the US, it was like just a search box. And then simply translating an English interface for Asian countries did not necessarily serve users well there. So those efforts kind of evolved over time. So there would be fixed assets like the brand, maybe the UI framework, but then for the local audiences, be different content. The iconography could be different because, back then, this is before Facebook kind of took over like the thumbs up, but like we would refrain from using any kind of thumbs up iconography because that's considered very offensive in some cultures. Or even the choice of colors, like red in Western cultures, red can often mean alert or stop, but red in other cultures it's a very lucky color, So those were just a few examples of design considerations and differences across different cultures.
Thank you so much, Irene. So how do you measure the success of a design project in terms of user behavior and emotions? And what metrics or tools do you use to do so?
This is one of the reasons why user research is such an important function in a company. It's not the only reason why they should exist, but they play a really key role in helping the development team get feedback. And like I said, like if you think of like the key principles for how to develop in this world, whether it's yourself or a product, it's like you start where you are, you take action, and then you get feedback and you iterate. If you're not methodically getting feedback, then you're really not able to iterate and you're designing in the dark. So the user research organizations that I built were really instrumental in assessing, measuring the success of design efforts. We call that kind of summative evaluation. There are other efforts that are considered more formative or generative, but that's not what this question is about. We would look at, there's an industry kind of metric called Net Promoter that I think a lot of companies are familiar with. A lot of marketing teams might be familiar with it too, but it's kind of meant to be like a single number that captures user satisfaction. So how likely would you recommend this product or service to a friend? So certainly there's some value there, but going a little bit deeper, there are user experience metrics that can be tracked. If you think of the customer journey or the user journey through an experience, you could develop user experience metrics for each phase and stage of that user journey and track that, whether it's task completion rate or time on task or user satisfaction. And all of those metrics, if captured and done well at key moments in the user journey, can help you understand, like, how are people feeling? How frustrating or successful is this design? And where to go from there. I've seen some product teams also develop product metrics, like with Yahoo Personals. The team felt like they needed to optimize for number of replies, because the more somebody would get a reply to an inquiry or an invitation, the more likely they would engage with the product. Or Gmail, in the early days of Gmail, we found that if people sent certain number of emails within a certain number of days of signing up for Gmail, they would more likely stick with the product. Or if they could populate their contacts with at least 7 contacts within the first 3 days, or I'm just making this up, but it's some kind of metric like that. And so those were product metrics that the team would optimize for. That kind of helps set some kind of target or goal around, like, okay, let's help people get ramped up with contacts. How do we make it really easy for people to get their contacts into Gmail? So that they can use it successfully. But I would say those metrics are a little bit different. They're still important, but they serve a different purpose because they're not necessarily used to, it is a way of understanding, like, is my product working for people? But it's also very different in nature than tracking usability metrics. And then there's some things that are just like very qualitative that are hard to measure, but still very important. Like when you think about, like, design is about evoking an intended emotion. How do you measure that? And how do you know if people are truly feeling whatever it is that you're trying to feel? And so we developed like a factor analysis method at Yahoo to try to measure the qualified attributes. And this is something that's often used in brand marketing, but like to get a panel of users who kind of rate your experience based on a number of adjectives. And then the closer the adjectives are that they choose to the ones that you intended, that would suggest that your design is more successful. But like if the adjectives they choose are way off and very different from the adjectives you're striving for, then that is an indicator that your design is not successful.
Thank you so much, Irene, for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So could you please share with us, what does your day look like and any interesting stories?
I'm not sure how helpful or pedagogical my answer to this question would be. I'm in a different phase of life now. Like, I just turned 50 last year. I have a daughter in college. I have a daughter who's about to leave the home. I have aging parents who live next door. And, I work part-time. My job at Khosla Ventures is part-time, and I have 2 dogs. And I have been very focused on learning and exploring different things that, as my interests evolve and as my needs evolve, there is some portion of time that is spent taking care of myself, some portion of time that's spent taking care of other people, and some portion of time that is work, and then another portion of time that is spent on learning and developing myself. And so that very Montessori in the sense that it's really about, loving to learn and pursuing my interests and taking them as deeply as I want them to go, and to explore and play without judgment, any kind of goal or intended outcome. So I'm in a phase of life now where I'm deliberately not goal-oriented, not achievement-oriented. It's a real sharp contrast from where I was 30 years ago. But that's because I'm just in a different phase of life right now.
Thank you so much, Irene. So we'll conclude this show by your 3 favorite book recommendations and people who inspire you the most in the space.
The first book I'd like to call out is the book that changed my life. One of the books that changed my life. It's The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. I read this book when I was in graduate school, and it completely changed my worldview. It spoke to my heart, but it's a great articulation for why design is important and what does psychology have to do with it. And so this is the book that kind of made me feel like this is what I want to devote my life towards. It's something that I believe very deeply that it's extremely important in this world. And it's one of the first books that I will refer executives to if they want to learn more about design. The book that I'm reading right now, I think will be a lifelong companion. It's by Rick Rubin. It's his new book. He just published it, called The Creative Act, A Way of Being. And this book is a collection of essays on creativity and mindfulness. So it really speaks to exactly the things that I care about. And I think he says so eloquently what I passionately feel. It's nice to see that articulated, and somehow seeing it in print makes it even more true. A third book that I'll recommend, and this is really because I think it's a very obscure book, but I think this audience would be interested in it, especially given the questions that we kind of explored today. This is a book called The Geometry of Design by Kimberly Elam, I think is how you pronounce her last name, but I'm not sure. The last name is spelled Elam. And this is a beautiful short book that includes studies on proportion and composition. Why are some things visually more appealing to us as human beings than others? And it really goes into the mathematics behind visual design and what works and doesn't and why. I mean, it's the only book I've encountered that really explores it in this way. And it speaks to psychology and perception and cognition. It speaks to design. It speaks to math and science. So again, like another book that kind of makes my heart sing. And I think all of these books kind of embody and represent like and shaped like who I am and how I see the world. Your other question around like the people who inspire me, it's extremely hard to kind of identify 3 human beings, over the course of 50 years, because I think that evolves and changes, and we're drawn to different people for different reasons because we are multidimensional beings. But I kind of think of them in 3 categories. The first is just people in general. Like, obviously I have a strong interest in human beings, given my interest in psychology. And I consider any kind of interaction I have with the world, especially when I am surrounded by other people or even individuals, whether it's a crowd or a small group, it's sort of an interesting study of anthropology. And so it's this understanding and interaction with other people that inspires me in so many ways. It makes me reflect on myself. It makes me think about, what are the opportunities? And it's just like the human experience. I mean, this is like why we're here on this earth. What is the work that we have to do internally and externally? Other people, more specifically, any creative who makes. I find creative people so inspiring because they are lifelong learners. They are really connecting with their inner self, and their soul is kind of manifesting through their creation. And when people are making, that's when their heart is singing. That's when they're happiest. That's also when they're really tuned into the world and to themselves. They're connecting with their hearts. They're also connecting with the stimulus around them. And then also, to be a successful creative or successful maker, you have to shed a lot of internal stuff to do that. You have to shed internal judgment or ego, greed or avarice. And this is true for people who are creative in all kinds of modalities, whether it's movement or visual arts or music. But really, in any kind of field, there is creativity, and everyone has the capacity to do that within themselves. But it's just so beautiful when you see that manifesting amongst people. And then the third category of persons that inspire me are the female executives that I've had the privilege of working with throughout my career. I've been reflecting on this lately because my mom just had her birthday yesterday, and I took a nice hike with her over the weekend. And I was asking about her experience because she was a computer programmer and analyst when I was growing up. And so she served as a great role model for me. And I was asking her what it was like during those decades to be working in the computing field before it became very lucrative and exciting. And she was telling me how there were just as many women in the profession as there were men. And I was thinking about like my early days at Netscape, there were just as many female executives as there were male executives, and they were amazing. They were smart, confident, well-spoken, bold without being abrasive. It's a very fine line for women in the workplace to walk because if you're too assertive, you're labeled as aggressive, and things like that. And I feel like the tech culture has only grown to be more masculine, macho, misogynist as time has gone on. And we, why that happened is a separate conversation that's probably beyond the scope of this podcast. But it saddened me a lot. But I think about like the women that I surrounded myself with who were just a few years ahead of me, maybe 5 or 10 years more experienced than I was, who modeled the behavior that I wanted to see and kind of taught me how to be an effective female executive in an industry that increasingly became dominated by men and a male driven culture. So a shout out to all those people who were my mentors, both directly and indirectly.
Thank you so much, Irene, for sharing all these wonderful recommendations with us. We're looking forward to host you again in our upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.